Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is the first Rainforest Ambitions event you're tuning into, welcome. This is day 1 of 3 for the summit, which is built to culminate on June 22nd, World Rainforest Day. And we're very excited to be launching a global summit like this for the first time ever. This is World Rainforest Day's 5th anniversary. And with more partners and events than ever before, this is really a milestone for us. So thank you for joining us. To our panelists and to everybody watching. The goal of Rainforest Ambitions is to bring together and amplify the different voices, experiences, knowledge, and perspectives of all the actors, so organizations, collectives, or individuals who in one way or another are involved in the defense or restoration of tropical rainforests and our planet more broadly. And this is truly a very complex mission, and it requires the involvement of people all over the world, not just those living in or around rainforests. It requires the commitment of all sectors and fields. And so today we've convened a group of people who, in different ways, are not only at the forefront of this movement today, but will also be the future of it. Youth environmentalists. So I'm going to hand it over to them to introduce themselves. Let's go Rosie, Zuzanna, Joe, and Naya.
Great, thank you so much, Nia, for this introduction. So hi, everyone. My name is Roshan. I go by Rosie. I am the team leader for Gen Z for the Trees at Rainforest Partnership. We're the youth branch of RP, and we launched close to 1 year ago on World Rainforest Day 2020. So in a couple more days, it's going to be Gen Z for the Trees' first birthday. A little bit about me. I'm a 19-year-old rising senior at the University of Texas at Austin. So I'm a college student from the United States. I'm a quintuple major in Plan 2 honors, government, economics, international relations and global studies, and Asian cultures and languages, Chinese. It's a lot, but there's a lot of overlap between them, so that's why I can do those all. My passion is in environmental policy, and I plan to pursue a master's in public policy after I'm done with my undergraduate. I've been working with Gen Z for the Trees since our launch last summer to basically, we started with a lot of research on palm oil, and then from there we expanded into teams on each of the main forest risk commodities, so that include palm oil, beef, soya, and timber pulp and paper. I can tell you all about, very briefly, a little project which our team did with palm oil research. Last fall, we were looking into the big corporate actors in the palm oil industry. And we basically looked at their published mill list and were able to compile a list, a spreadsheet of like over 5,000 palm oil mills, which hadn't really been looked at with those attributes by anyone before. And we identified 300 palm oil mills which didn't have a universal mill list ID number. So they were missing from this universal mill list, which is in fact a work in progress and is constantly being updated with new mills to have this kind of standardized list of palm oils across the globe. And so we reached out to Global Forest Watch, which is a really well-known, widely used platform, and shared this data with them. And then just about 3 days ago, we got an email back from them, from the person who we had spoken with in lifetime previously, to let us know that 31 new mills are going to be added to the universal mill list of the 300 mills, which we kind of sent to them to say that these don't have an ID number yet. So we can now match the ones that were duplicates and send those back to those corporations to inform them how they can better match those to their own published mill list. And we're going to have 31 new mills added to the universal mill list. That's basically the outcome of Gen Z for the Trees' work. And then Nia, I don't know if you wanted to direct to the next person, but maybe Zuzanna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Zuzanna. I am currently in like the 2nd grade of high school, so that's 10th grade. And I'm graduating early, so I'm going to be taking a double gap year and working on Thriving Corals. So Thriving Corals is an organization I started back in 2019, and we work primarily on things connected to education. So we do both education in terms of the oceans and climate change. And like right now, I'm the team manager, so I just focus on like managing all the projects, and I specifically oversee everything that has to do with education. So online courses, lesson plans, just talking to schools and teachers and all those kinds of things. And 2 exciting projects that we have coming up are our new lesson plans are going to be launching in September, and those are going to be available to basically anyone that's wanting to use them. So if you know any teachers, anytime, we have lesson plans. And the second project that we're working on is called the Mindful Intern. It's basically an internship program for middle school and high school students. So they can come in, work with us, build and like develop different skills. And at the same time, they can work on our educational initiatives, because in the end, they are going to be learning from the things we make. So if they're involved, then they can make some key decisions that are going to make this experience better for them. So I'm going to pass it on to Joe.
Great, thank you. My name's Joe. I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm here representing Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, but a quick bit about myself before I go into our organisation. I'm an ecologist by training, but I'm currently doing a master's in environmental policy. So some scientists may call me a traitor for moving over to the environmental policy, but I think it's really important that our policy is well informed by the science, and that we're able to communicate between these two quite separate spheres, or separate in the past, whereas now we need to really bring them into the same sort of conversation. But that's a little bit about what I'm doing. But I'm here representing Reserva, and for those of you who don't know about Reserva, it's an organization that was founded approximately 2 years ago now, and we mainly work in sort of three main areas of work, which are sort of conservation, education, and storytelling. With respect to the conservation one, what Reserva's sort of main goal was to sort of connect the sort of wave of youth environmentalism that we've seen over the last couple of years. With the strikes for climate, the sort of rise in sort of environmental policy that youth have get involved with, and sort of tried and tested methods of land conservation. Land purchasing, when done correctly, in conjunction with local partners and indigenous peoples, is possibly one of the most effective ways of conserving the rainforest. There are issues of how it's been done in the past, but Reserva is, looking at this, and we want to be able to make sure we're doing it correctly and in sort of keeping with our goals of being this sort of international inclusive movement. And obviously land purchase, although it's great, has been very expensive in the past, and it's traditionally sort of the realm of large NGOs, and predominantly from the global north or Western or first world, whichever sort of developed countries, whatever the term you'd like to use. So Reserva's sort of aim is to create a chance for young people to get involved in this through sort of different means. And what it means is we've had to build a completely different sort of structure to what your traditional NGOs are built, but it's working, and we're going to hopefully have some really exciting announcements coming up soon related to our flagship project in Ecuador, which we're closely linked with Na Neblina, which Naya will talk about in a second. But really, just to add to the Reserva's main goal is to really help young people make a tangible difference, so that young people can feel like they've contributed to something directly, knowing where their money has gone, knowing what they've achieved. And we really want that to be the spark of their sort of future conservation work. It's that, sometimes I'm sure we can all here in the panel and in the audience feel that sometimes our work is sort of ignored, or we don't quite know where it's going. So it's really important for us that young people feel they are making a tangible difference to the planet. But I'm sure I'll have a chance to talk a lot more about Reserva in the later discussion. So I'll hand over to Naya to quickly introduce herself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Naya. I'm from Ecuador, and I live here in Ecuador. The organization I'm part of is called La Neblina. We are only 3 young women behind La Neblina: Carla, Emilia, and myself. And this project, well, a little bit about myself. I am studying biology. I have 20 years, and I'm also studying photography. And so about La Neblina, one of our main objectives is to, we think conservation should be linked to other fields of knowledge, and fields of knowledge that are commonly seen as not related to conservation, but we think in the future they should be, and they can. So fields of knowledge like arts, politics, as Joe mentioned. So we also have another objective. We have a few, but the most important ones are these. And we also want to give different voice to projects, different from the ones they already have, to conservation projects that we want to support. And speaking about a project that we had last year, we organized talks and workshops with really well-known photographers from Ecuador, and to teach how photography can be related to conservation and used for as a tool. And the money we collected for because of the inscriptions, we donated everything to Reserva, to the project they have with the youth finance reserve. And another project we are working on right now, on January, we went to visit the Choco Rainforest in Esmeraldas, Ecuador. And we recorded a lot of material for building a documentary that we are editing right now. And yeah, it's pretty much about telling a little bit about the reality of people that belong to communities and work for the Canandé Reserve and the Sor Escondida Reserve, but people that have a controversial background, like working for the companies that take wood. So it's really, we're working on it and we expect to finish it soon. So that's everything about La Neblina.
Okay, thank you. So now that you know a little bit more about our panelists, I just want to give a little bit of background about why we pulled this group together and why we're doing this event generally. So youth action is critical in conservation, as it is in many movements today, but it's specifically vital here because many scientists and science-backed reports place this generation, as in the one that we have represented at this panel, as potentially the last generation to have a chance to effectively reverse the damage that's been done to our planet. And I don't say that to invoke fear or panic, but really quite the opposite. I know about our panelists. You're about to know a lot more about their organizations and the work they're doing. And if the fight is in their hands, it is in good hands. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. And if anybody has any questions at any point in the panel, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get to them either during our conversation or at the end when we have time for a Q&A. So let's get started with a very basic question. Can each of you tell us a little bit about your journey into the field and specifically how where you live or where you grew up has impacted the way you approach conservation? And let's just go backwards. So let's go Naya, Joe, Zuzanna, Rosie.
Okay, so as I told you before, I live in Ecuador and La Neblina was founded in Ecuador and Carla and Emilia are Ecuadorians too. And I think Ecuador has definitely influenced in our objectives and goals. Ecuador is a really tiny country compared to others and really recognized because of its biodiversity. And also I recognized it because people here don't appreciate it, don't value the things we have, the biodiversity, the nature, even the cultural diversity. So I think my journey and our journey to conservation, it's a little bit frustrating because people don't even know what they have beneath their feet. So it's kind of like also a motivation for allowing people to see it. And also, like in Ecuador, you can travel from the beach to a glacier in a few hours. It's amazing. And I think many people in my life and have like people, Ecuadorians tell you this country, it's the worst, you have to get out, you have to go study somewhere else. And people, foreign people that come from Europe or United States or more developed countries, they see Ecuador and they say, oh my God, this is amazing, you have to stay here. So it's really weird that people here don't appreciate what we have. and that's certainly a big motivation for us.
Yeah, I guess kind of opposite to Naya, obviously being from the United Kingdom, it was rated one of the most nature depleted countries in the world not long ago. So but that being said, I am very fortunate to live in quite a rural area of the United Kingdom, quite close to the sea, and that's definitely shaped my sort of journey. You know, even from a very young age, I was really into gardening and really into sort of how I could help nature, whether that was bird feeders. And I was very lucky that my school was in a small village where we had access to river, you know, local river. So that's sort of where I started. But my sort of move into sort of conservation is quite relatively new. Even though I did ecology at university, I didn't quite know exactly how I was going to get involved in conservation well, I still don't exactly know, but I'm moving more towards policy. I've always had a very scientific, and I always thought I was going to be in a very academic background, but I've realized that academia isn't really where I think I'm best suited. But, you know, the journey is still ongoing. You know, we're only 22. I think I might be the oldest person on this panel, so we're only 22, so we're all still learning. But yeah, you know, growing up, loving nature is obviously a big part, and I'm sure everybody here agrees with that. But it's also realizing, linking back to what Naya was saying, that you can bring in different skills. You know, when I was young, I wanted to be prime minister, but then I also wanted to be a conservationist. So it's bringing those, and it's sort of just feeling free to take the journey that best suits you, and realizing that there isn't really a specific journey that you have to take. But yeah, definitely those formative years with nature is very important, which is why I am very passionate about other people being able to have those opportunities, and realizing that even here in the UK, there is a lot of nature that you can see, especially sort of weird and, you know, sort of wonderful nature. We've got quite a few invertebrates, so although we might not have many charismatic species, it's you know, it's looking out and making sure that people are aware of what's around them. So again, it links back to what Naya's saying, but from a slightly different angle. So that's where I sort of started, really. I think it's Zuzanna, hand over to you to say your journey.
For me, I think it was mainly just my interest in water sports. So I was really into windsurfing and kite surfing and sailing and all those different things. And just because I did a lot of those sports and I had that connection with like the sea already, I started noticing what was going on, and like just people leaving trash on the beaches all the time and just all those things, and how the ecosystem, literally every year I would go and windsurf, it just would be damaged more and more because of our actions. And it was just very visible to me, especially that it was something I'd only do during the summer. And so if you have that little break and then you come back, you can like remember and you can really see the change. And so I think that was something that really led me to go that way with my project. But at the same time, with the education part, in Poland, our system is like, we're basically graded on how much we can memorize from the classes. And so one of the goals with this project is to improve that and to change the way we learn, so it's more based on the skills we get and like general, like the applications of the knowledge, not just memorizing it. So again, I think that was an influence just because I saw that in my own education. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna pass it on to Rosie.
Yeah, thank you. It's very good to hear from all of you all. So for me, my story, I guess, I've always lived in a place that's sort of outside the city. I tell people I'm from Austin, Texas, but I'm actually from a small farm 30 minutes east of downtown Austin, in this place that's really like forgotten by everyone else in greater Austin. So I've grown up on this small farm and just playing around. I was always really into gardening too, just like Joe. And like living with our neighbors and their farm animals and this kind of stuff. And along with that, my family would take us traveling every summer break when I was younger. And so we could go visit places like Oregon and Alaska, and a lot of just like beautiful places. And I got to visit national parks, and I would do those little like junior park ranger certifications and get a badge. So I was also just always really connected to nature and just the beauty of it, and the importance of protecting wildlife and protecting indigenous peoples. where they are and respecting that, you know, like the land is something that connects us all, and we're all kind of here on this planet as guests, and we need to be good stewards of where we live. So yeah, that's mostly it for me and the connection to that. With rainforests, specifically why I have this connection to rainforests, I went on a study abroad program in 2019 in the summer to Costa Rica. And so that was my first like on the ground experience walking through rainforests. We traveled the whole country in the span of about a month. And so we visited different jungles, a lot of different national parks, both the Pacific and the Atlantic slope, and the mountainous regions and the volcanoes, the cloud forests, and all of these different places. So getting the exposure to this different ecosystem, I had never been in a tropical country before that. And meeting the smallholder farmers and meeting the people who sort of engage with rainforests, and that's just been their whole life. It was a whole kind of like new world that opened my eyes to the importance of rainforests and again the beauty of this world. So then that's also part of the reason I got involved with Rainforest Partnership. Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone. And to sort of stick with the topic of your backgrounds a little bit, I think for a lot of us who are involved in youth movements, so many of the resources that we're able to tap into and the communities that we build are rooted in our places of education. So middle school, high school, university. Specifically, probably to the three of you who have finished high school, how did your involvement in the field change as you transitioned from high school to university? Like what new doors opened up for you and what resources were you suddenly able to take advantage of, and how did that change your involvement in the field? I don't know which one of you wants to go first. Rosie, maybe let's start with you.
Sure. So yeah, I've just finished my third year as a university student. So I finished high school back in 2018. And I would say one of the main differences is that I've sort of just learned a lot more about sustainability and environmental science, which is none of my majors, but we have the ability to focus on that with bringing that perspective of someone who understands international political economy into talking about how to protect the rainforest and the planet. So in high school, I think one of the most like climate forward and environmental protection things and community like service things that I had done was organizing a food donation program out of our high school's cafeteria, because there's some laws that mandate that every student be served the same food and all of those items, even if they don't plan on eating them. So it was leading to a lot of food waste where people would just throw out their milk cartons and their fruits and their bags of crackers without ever touching them. And so my friends and I kind of worked, and I set up this refrigerator and these crates where we could collect them rather than letting people toss them into the garbage bin. We would collect them and then kind of store them, and it allowed us to both reduce hunger in our community and redivert like hundreds of pounds worth of food over the course of my senior year from going to waste. So I think for me, combating a waste in the economy has always been something that I cared a lot about, just naturally, and it was never something someone told me to do, and it was never something I planned to do. But then after graduating high school and going into college and being immersed in all these new opportunities, like the ability to study abroad in Costa Rica and learn about rainforest ecology and start to understand more and do environmental economics research fellowships with the Department of Economics, I think it's opened a lot of doors for me to be able to have sort of more credibility, because I am a part of this organization and we can do outreach on behalf of all of us to different like global roundtables and different people who run these platforms that support transparency and traceability in different industries of forest risk commodities. And so, yeah, I think one thing that also changed for me is that when I was in high school, it was sort of the start of a lot of the youth organizing, which now we kind of recognize as sort of part of the new normal. But it was February of 2018 when the Parkland shooting happened in the United States at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. So that really affected everyone in my year and everyone at my school. And that was in my final semester of high school. So we also organized a walkout on our campus for gun violence. And then when I got to college, I sort of thought that a lot of organizing meant doing stuff just like that. But I've actually learned in the past few years that there's so much more to being activist than just marching and protesting, because that's only one way to try to get the attention of people in power and try to make change. And so Gen Z for the Trees focuses a lot more on turning ourselves into young experts on exactly what we're talking about when it comes to the things that are driving deforestation, and then reaching out in a positive way to encourage big corporate actors on telling them exactly how they can do more and providing them all the information and the intelligence and recommendations they might need. So that's a big change that I didn't really see myself or even know that could happen from when I was a high schooler. And if I could go back and tell myself as a high schooler, I would just say, don't worry, you're going to have things figured out and you're going to have plenty to do when you are in college.
Yeah, I guess just to add to what Rosie was saying, completely agree about, the sort of curriculum expanding as you kind of move your way through from high school. Here it's quite a rigid curriculum where there's not much flexibility, and then you move up to sort of university, you learn a bit more, and then like during my masters now, we get given very, very broad topics which we're allowed to explore. Whatever they just give us topics like explore an environmental issue, and then you have to explore one of your choice. You can choose what's interested. But I think what I'd like to add that's sort of different is the fact that you kind of meet a lot of different people and a lot of different through joining sort of societies, through joining people you live with in halls, or things that sound kind of trivial, but you're bringing together a lot of very different outlooks on life. Whereas in high school people tend to live in the same town, people tend to have done the same thing. So moving through university, they are kind of like, they bring a lot of different people together, and I think that really helped me on my journey to sort of moving from very local focused and then working with Reserva, which is obviously this international organization, with our youth council being in sort of 17 countries. And it was through a university friend that I found out about Reserva. You get to know different people that are working in similar things but may have different interests. Some of my closest friends were doing physics degrees but were members of the environmental society. So it's that you get to know a lot of different people, and I think that was such a big factor on my sort of journey. And then through Reserva now we get to talk to lots of different schools, talk to lots of different universities, so we've got really good connections there. So I think the people you meet at university as you move up for education, I found is really great and really helps debates, and you really get into sort of issues that you don't think are connected but really, really are. Our environmental society used to do things about fast fashion, which before coming to uni I'd never considered as sort of an environmental issue, because I'm not a very big fashion fan. I like my jumpers, plain jumpers and shorts, but I didn't realize the sort of big factors that fast fashion plays. But then I had a flatmate in first year who was doing sort of art and fashion, and that brought it all in together. So that was just something to add about the people that you meet as you move up. Is really great at bringing together different ideas.
Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit into the organizations that you're all part of. And specifically, I know we have both sides represented here, so this is something that I'd really love for us to have a conversation about. But what are some of the differences between joining an established organization as a youth member versus starting up your own movement? So I can think of a few obvious ones, and you will all correct me based on your own experiences. But at your own movement, for example, you decide where you put your time, you fully build out your agenda and your approach, but you also have to tackle the massive step of getting your name out there and building something from the ground up. Whereas at an established organization, you come in and the name and the network are both there, but you may not be as free to devote time exactly to what you want to devote time to. You may not have the amount of influence you want to have as maybe a young newcomer to an established organization. So given the different experiences we have here, can you all speak a little about this? And maybe let's start with Zuzanna as the founder of Thriving Corals.
So my experience is mostly starting my own movement, but I have volunteered for some organizations. And honestly, for the most part, I felt like I was given tasks, but then whatever would happen would sort of be the mindset of like, okay, so like the younger people, we're just gonna give them simple stuff to do, so like they don't mess anything up, basically. So that was what happened, like in my experience. But then starting my own movement, it's been really a great time. Like I really enjoy this. It takes a lot of motivation, and so one, I would say like the biggest challenge with starting your own movement is like keeping it going. And so at first it may sound really weird because you're like maybe like really excited about it, or maybe you're like super passionate about it, and I'm super passionate about it too. But there's just so many things that are gonna happen on the way, and there's a lot of moments where, especially if you're not an established organization and nobody knows you exist, and people are just gonna like tell you no, or they're just gonna like ignore you completely. And motivation and motivating others, especially that if you're starting on your own and then trying to find people to join you, they need to see that you're motivated so that they follow along, because otherwise it's just not gonna work. Like, you cannot expect people that don't know you to bring in a lot of good energy all the time if you're just really like sad, for example. So that, I think, is like the biggest thing about starting your own movement.
Naya, do you have a similar experience as the co-founder of your organization?
Yeah, it's really different. I'm gonna speak about something else. When I joined, I wasn't present when they created the La Neblina, and it was actually not Neblina, it was Chocomprometidos, and then we changed names and concept because we wanted to have a we learned so much and we wanted to have more possibilities with the project. So what I wanted to say is that I think when you join an already established organization, you just offer your help. You just find a project that you like, and I guess it's really it's really helpful too. But they tell you what to do, and they already have everything established. So I think one of the best things about creating your own organization is that you have the control. Also, you have to be really strict to keep it going, as Zuzanna said. But I think it inspires creativity because you want to create something different. You want to create something that it's viable, and you want people to hear you, and that's the most difficult part. It's really hard to be heard and to become credible when you have little experience and you are starting from scratch. But I think that inspires a lot of creativity, and I think creativity is the key to conservation, because we need we need new ideas, we need new projects, and we don't need I mean, they are also important, the already established organizations, but especially for young people, we need them to know that we can start something from scratch and be creative, and no ideas are bad ideas.
And Joe, I know you came into Reserva not as a founder, but pretty early on. So you were able to sort of follow the organization as it grew into what it is today. How does your experience play out in terms of this question?
Yeah, I guess when you're sort of founding your own organization, I think it's really important to be really clear that it's accomplishing something different to it's. I think sometimes there is an obsession with being a founder. But if you've identified a clear goal and a clear mission that you'd sets you apart, I think then you should go and found. If no organization is doing what you want to do or how you do it, then you need to go and set your own organization. But I think we need to be careful not to set up organizations sometimes. If there is an existing organization that you can feed into and does something similar to what you'd like it to do, I think don't be afraid to sort of go in and sort of say like, I know you've been doing it this way, but why don't we trial it this way? And I think my experience is mainly in youth-led organizations, so perhaps it's slightly different than being involved in like a large NGO that's been around for many decades. I can't really speak to that, but I guess being a part of a youth-led organization, even one that I didn't found, because everybody's young and everybody's still learning, there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of scope to sort of wiggle the, how things work, and if things aren't working, it's all a learning process for everybody. So I guess, yeah, if you've identified a clear goal, then I think starting your organization is a really great thing. And as Naya and Zuzanna have said, it's a lot of work, but I think it is worth it if you know that clear goal. But if you think, this organization is very close to what I'd like to do, but I think it could do it slightly different, or I can help, then definitely do get involved with existing organizations. And especially if there's something like Reserva, or like those that you can sort of get involved with and have quite a say, then I think existing organizations are really excellent, which for me is my experience, because like you said, I joined Reserva, I joined it a year ago, so it was still only like a year old, but it was quite established with its sort of mechanisms. But a couple of us joined, and we had to adapt slightly because there was new, little things like new time zones, like how we're included, so you had to work differently. So yeah, I think existing organizations, you have to be strong, realize that there are networks and structures already, but don't be afraid to sort of speak up and say, why don't we try this? And if then the higher up people say no and just shut you down, then I think that's probably not the organization to be working for. And I think any organization that's not open to new ideas is not one really worth giving your energy to, perhaps. But that's just my experience anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And so it sounds, I think we don't want to make it sound like everything is just as easy as sort of the last question has maybe made it sound to some people. So sort of switching to the opposite end of that, what are the main, and this is very broad, so feel free to go into as much detail as you'd like, or just keep it very base level, but what are the main roadblocks and hurdles that you face either as a young person in this field or as a youth-led organization generally? And let's start with Rosie, because we didn't hear from you for the last question, and then anybody else who wants to jump in, feel free.
Sure. So when it comes to hurdles, I mean, there are some that I guess everyone has to contend with, but with youth, for example, the issue of time management can be a challenge because for Gen Z for the Trees, the vast majority of our members are high school or college students. So having, like Zuzanna and Naya said, the discipline and like motivation to be working on these things like late at night, during your weekends, during your Zoom classes at the same time. Don't tell our teachers we do that. But like having to do that alongside being students and taking your exams is sort of a hurdle in a sense that it's not something that can't be overcome, but it is something that sometimes gets in the way. We wish we could spend more energy on this, but we are also full-time students, most of us. Some other hurdles include, like you had mentioned earlier, getting our name out. When you start an organization that's like super from scratch and from the ground. And I kind of had the best of both worlds experience because Gen Z for the Trees was a brand new youth branch of Rainforest Partnership, which is already a very well-established organization. So we had that sort of organizational support from RP, but we also had the flexibility and freedom to set up what we want our pillars to be and organize how we want our kind of communications to run and set up the kind of research that we see is sort of, there are holes in the world's understanding about this or the world's attention on something. But yeah, some of the other roadblocks in a sense is just getting in contact with the right stakeholders and the right sort of people in power. So to give a bit of detail on an upcoming big campaign, which Gen Z for the Trees and Rainforest Partnership are running, it's going to be a global call to action, encouraging different companies to adopt new commitments towards a goal of no deforestation by 2030, and then more specific policies, plans, and pledges for how they're going to tackle those like one commodity at a time. And so our team has been pulled together a lot of research on the forest risk commodities and on the policies that exist or the lack thereof from a lot of companies. So our focus is on grocery retailers and then on restaurant chains. And this is all just a bit of an oral sneak peek about what it is we're planning. But the reason we do this, or the reason this is our plan, is because grocery stores and restaurant chains are in a really unique position in a global supply chain where they source from so many different places, and they're the last big player before a product reaches an individual consumer or a family or household. So they have a lot of power, and they also have to be kind of paying attention to what customers tell them. And so our youth group is going to be raising our voices and communicating to them that there are some steps they can take to better protect rainforests and simply pay attention to this, and that there are even some recommendations we have for them for how they can do that. But always there are hurdles when it comes to things like this, like getting in contact with the right people there and presenting the information to them in a way that's not going to overwhelm them or anything like that, because these companies obviously are not like, they're not Rainforest Partnership. This is not their area of expertise, and it's not even necessarily something that they as a company have the prerogative to do if this is not anything that has to do with their business model. So for us, I would say in short, one of the other hurdles or challenges is bringing a lot of people into the realm of talking and taking action on protecting rainforests and the planet and the oceans and everything, when it's not something that they themselves saw themselves working on, because that's a shift of their energy that has to come from them, and it has to be something we convince them to do. And it's all within reason, but a lot of the time that kind of personal like shift of these are our priorities, these are the things we care about, is as difficult as, say, like getting enough attention on the platforms and social media and getting your name out.
I guess just to add quickly, you know, one very general one is sort of the quite, you know, speaking as sort of reservist convention and policy officer, I quite often have to go to meetings with sort of politicians, world leaders, you know, people like that. And, you know, for those in the audience, it can often quite, like, I don't want to say patronizing is probably the wrong word, but there is a lot of sort of, oh, well done you for preparing a presentation. And I feel like saying, you know, I'm 22 doing my masters and stuff, like I don't need you to sort of say well done to me for pulling together a presentation, but people can often speak down to you, and it's, you know, it's difficult and it's hard to take on when you want to say like, please take me seriously, but it's something you have to sort of persevere with and say, you know, I am saying a lot of really good substantial things, so please don't just say like, oh look, we've got some young people coming. And this, you know, this is very anecdotal, but I guess our other panelists will probably agree, you know, quite often you go to meetings and you're like the young person. It's like, now we're going to hear from some young people, and it's sort of, you know, okay, I didn't realize it sort of automatically sets up that sort of divide when it doesn't need to be. It's not, I don't go as like reserver as in like an NGO. It's like, oh, here are young people to talk. The way it's just phrasing, I guess, is very careful. And when, if you do start going to meetings with sort of NGOs, politicians, just be aware of it. And, you know, it can be quite uncomfortable to call it out, but if you feel comfortable, you know, please, you know, sort of say, you know, I thank you so much for taking an interest, but, you know, please don't patronize me and say well done for pulling together a PowerPoint presentation. Like, it's that sort of balance. And then yeah, that was just something very anecdotal to add, but something I think is quite valid as a barrier, that sort of it's there, and it's always done as sort of like, we're bringing in some young people to feed into this. It's never sort of on a dual, it's never on like a level pegging. Then it's always on their terms. It's always on older people's terms then that young people are brought in. It's never sort of a two-way conversation, at least in many instances. But there are some really, really good examples as well of really good behavior. So I don't want to paint all politicians to be awful at it, but just to raise attention to that.
I can add something. I think also one of the difficulties I had, and I've had, and our group has, is that when you want to build your own project from scratch, not the organization, but a project that is your own, and that you can say, we made this and we created it. So that was our recent experience with this documentary. As I told you before, one of our objectives is to give voice to other projects. So that makes us really dependent on other projects, but we wanted to make something that was ours, and we created it. And it's really hard because people, you need a lot of money. You need people with experience that can teach you, and you need connections, a lot of connections. So it was really hard for us, especially to be heard, like to find a reserve, a place where we can go and they can, like, we can get to an agreement. And it was also auto-financiated, so it was really hard too. And also it's hard to find people that can support you, and because as young people with little experience, they just think it's not worth it. So luckily we made it, and I think it's one of the best experience of having an organization that is yours. It's to create your own project from scratch.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if, Zuzanna, do you want to add anything in terms of hurdles and roadblocks?
I was gonna say that the main thing probably for me is, just because we work in education, is that there's sort of like a setup where, you know, like someone teaches you, and that's probably not a high school student. So when we come in and talk to teachers, you know, it sort of requires like a shift of a mindset that we are actually coming in and we want to collaborate with them instead of maybe just listen to them. And of course, there's a lot of things we can learn from them, and a lot of things that they can tell us about teaching that are very valuable to us. But at the same time, we would like our voices heard. And it can be a very difficult thing to balance those two and just find a way of communicating that works for both like the teachers and for us to be able to really say what we made. And so just defining those collaborations as someone that's younger and not necessarily supposed to be teaching a teacher is probably the most difficult thing.
Yeah, and I think everything the four of you have mentioned, I think all of us here can agree that some of that has come into play in our journeys in this field. Definitely everything you all have said, I can relate to. Joe, you said you were the oldest. I'm actually the oldest. I'm 23. But yeah, still definitely all things I can relate to. And so, Joe, I want to hop back to sort of what you were talking about in one of your hurdles. But I think for climate action and conservation, policy change and government decision making is a huge element of that field. And so, how do we strengthen the voices of young people in policy change or decision making, especially if it's not a field that young people generally just get a seat at? If you can't vote, like, you don't really have a voice. So how do we strengthen that? And I'm asking you because I know that's sort of your focus, but if anybody else wants to hop in after Joe, definitely go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, you know, youth engagement in policy, I think we spoke about this a little before. You know, policy can be quite a boring realm, you know, when you've got to read through sort of 100-page documents and briefings that aren't exactly the most appealing of documents. And I think, you know, it goes back to what I said in my previous answer. I think it's always done on sort of young people have to get involved in the existing structures and the existing sort of ways. There's no sort of recognition of the need to maybe change the way we communicate policy or the way we get people involved. And, you know, sort of the focus of my master's at the moment is how young people, the sort of mechanisms that young people can get involved in environmental governance. And there's, you know, there's examples of sort of advisory committees, there's examples of sort of constituencies at you know, the UN level, for like Gibbon, which Reserva is a part of. So there are structures that work, you know, there are good things and there are bad things about each of them. I just think there needs to be a real holistic view of, you know, let's take a step back and how can we actually bring young people in on equal footing, so it's not, you know, they have to, it goes back to, I think, Rosie, you mentioned about time differences and, you know, juggling time loads. We're all at school or university, whereas for many politicians, civil servants, this is their full-time job. So even that is kind of different, that you're in school in the UK, we're 9 to 3, and then most people work 9 to 5. So there's very little room for sort of, so it's things like that. I think that, again, it's something that sounds very trivial, but I think no one has actually really looked and said, how do we actually get young people involved on, at least maybe not their terms, but at least on equal terms, so it's not always young people having to work around, you know, the politicians. Politicians should genuinely want to listen. And, you know, it goes back to, because young people don't vote, many politicians don't listen to them. But I think there really needs to be a look a really system-wide look at how we get young people involved, not just environmental policy, it's health policy, it's social policy, it's all things. So I really think governments across the world need to have a strong look at themselves and think, how do we get involved? And as young people, it is quite difficult to get involved in sort of mainly because Reserva focuses at an international level. It is quite difficult to get involved in the UN. You have to get accredited to be involved in the talks. You have to and to get accredited, you have to be existing for 2 years and have finances, and so it's things like that that make it very difficult for young people to feed in anyway, and then it just gets very confusing. So that was a very rambling answer. It needs to be, I just think people need to have a look and sort of realize that young people have got really important things to say. It just needs to be done in a way that they can feed in like early in the process. It's not so like they're like, oh God, we're publishing something in 2 days, we haven't got a young person's view, let's get some young people. It needs to be that they're constantly feeding in and constantly having a chance to voice their opinions.
And we only have about 8 minutes left, so I just want to get through a couple more questions. We do have a question from the audience, but I'm going to save that one for a little bit later. Something that all of you have touched on briefly is this idea of a holistic approach to conservation or climate action, where you can't just be approaching it from one side. And Naya, when you and I were talking the other day, you described this to me as the new wave of conservation, where it isn't just, biologists who have been in the field for decades, but it's a focus on what any and every discipline and field can and should be doing. So what do you think this sort of multidisciplinary approach has enabled for climate action conservation? So this focus on having all these disciplines involved, what has it made possible for conservation or for your organization? Naya, if you want to take that question.
Yeah, I would love to. It's one of the objectives of Neblina, and it's a thing we have been talking about a long time now. As I told you the other day, there used to be this wave of thought about conservation that we need to get people out of a place in order to keep it safe. And that is no longer possible, and I think it never was. I think the right answer to conserve a place is to involve people. And also with the climate crisis we are living, we don't need a few people acting, we need everyone acting. We need everyone getting aware of what's happening, and we can achieve that with a multidisciplinary approach, with people realizing that from their own careers, their own passions, their own work, they can contribute to conservation. And it's also a matter of, it's not only going to affect certain people, the climate crisis, it's going to affect us all. So we all need to be involved. And as I told you before, only a limited group of people have been involved, like biologists, people that love nature, and that's it. And I think it's important that we let people know that they don't have to dedicate their lives to conservation. They don't have to learn everything about nature. They can do it from their own passions, and they can do it from their own communities and individual actions. And the multidisciplinary approach allows this.
Thank you, Naya. And I'm gonna take the audience question now and sort of combine it with one of our questions. And I'll put this out to all four of you. Maybe we can start with Zuzanna. We haven't heard from you in a bit. And let's just have this be our wrap-up question. But anonymous attendee has asked, how do you navigate between feeling angry, scared, and hopeful as young people with a scary future? Which might be true. And I also want to combine that. So how do you navigate those feelings of having a future that can be very uncertain, especially since you're very actively involved in climate action? And combine that with, what do you think the future of climate action looks like? Aside from, your own future and your own feelings, what do you think the fight for our planet is going to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now? And Zuzanna, let's start with you, and then let's just hop around and have everyone have a chance to speak a bit about it.
Probably to address the emotions question is, while we think about like everybody getting involved, you cannot like only blame yourself if something goes wrong, you know? I feel like, just for example, it was my personal experience was when I started the organization, I was like excited about it, and then as we grew, I just felt more and more responsibility, and there were moments when I was like feeling scared, like, you know, just there was like an overwhelming amount of work, and or sometimes I was angry because things weren't working out. And I think it's very important to have someone you can talk to about that and just bounce off ideas. And even if they're like not necessarily, they don't necessarily have the knowledge about, I don't know, conservation or climate change. Like in general, it's very useful just to talk to someone if you're feeling angry about something. And even if it's someone like that's outside the situation, it can be actually very, very helpful, because they're going to give you ideas that, even though maybe they're not viable, you can change something about the idea and do something with that. And to speak about the future of conservation, I think it's definitely going to be more young people involved. Like that's sort of like the way it's going now, and I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. And at the same time, I think while we do have a lot of projects that are technology based and social media and all those things, I actually feel like a lot of the projects, like right now, we're talking about place-based connections and those things. So I think we're going to actually be trying to get people outside more and into places that are critical and biodiverse and amazing. So that's how I see it going.
Yeah, thank you. Rosie, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, I have some thoughts to answer this question. So obviously this is something that basically everyone that I know struggles with, is how do we deal with all these emotions and the anxiety? I mean, there's a whole term for it, is climate anxiety. But I think that the antidote to fear and negativity is not just plain positivity, but action, because that shows you as an individual person that there is something you can do and you can get involved, and also to connect with a collective. And that just teaches you to think differently, because a lot of, at least in the United States and our culture, it's kind of like, you know, your individual is like every person puts themselves first, and that every individual person needs to be as important as they possibly can. But really, there's so much more that can be accomplished when you're working in a team. And so for me, I think overcoming the climate anxiety it's just being a part of Rainforest Partnership and Gen Z for the Trees has helped me a lot, because I know that the more I learn, the more I talk to other people, the more we're moving things in the right direction. And that alone is enough to tamp down like the fear that things are spiraling out of control. Because on top of that, a lot of the times in the headlines, we see all the negative news, but we don't see the positive news, because there is a lot of positive news out there. There's so many organizations doing great work, but we're not seeing it because those kind of headlines don't get people's attention as much. And so it takes a big psychological toll on young people to only be fed negative news. So one thing that we can also do is seek out the positive news and make those partnerships with people who are doing other work all throughout the world, and just keep feeding yourself the good stuff that will inform you about, like, you know, this organization is restoring land here, and this organization is contacting these companies and asking them to do better, and always just taking the next step and doing better. And what I think the future of climate action will look like, for sure with Zuzanna, there's a lot more youth that are going to be involved, because we're kind of reaching like the end of where the timeline has us for, I guess, like where we can make a change before there's a lot more damage that will occur. And so for me, I'm a big follower of solar punk, which is basically this future sort of like speculative fiction genre, but it's also a big genre of hope and action, which people can take right now to live differently, and like utilize their power of the imagination to believe in a future that's a lot more safe and clean and just. And earlier today in the opening plenary, I think Bella Lack talked about this, that it's more important to think about like what that alternative could be if we go down the better path, instead of worrying about all the things that would happen when we go down a bad path.
So I can go if I think there are many possible futures, and many of them are not as we would want them to be. But I think there's always hope, and we are a lot of people. So we are 7 billion humans. We can either end up really bad, and we will be witness of like we young people will live that, or we can really make a big change, and it's really possible with that amount of people. And I think the key is to look to have a better ability to look into the future, like really think not only in the present, not only in my current situation and how much money and how much passion I have for what I do, but to really look forward and think about other generations and think about what the world, what nature has been building for so many years, and we can't just destroy it all. So I think we have a lot of mixed up feelings, but and many people that tell us that there is no hope and just surrender. But I think it's better, whatever future we have, I think it's better if we are part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Yeah, well, I haven't got much to add. I think the three of you summed it up really, really well. You know, from a really sort of basic thing was for young people involved in the environmental movement, you know, it can become very overwhelming, as Rosie mentioned, and you know, it's important to take a break, I think, and just realize that this is, you know, like going back to it's really important to join these groups so that if you feel you need to take a break, you don't feel like the entire environmental movement is going to collapse. You know, and I'm guilty of feeling that sometimes. I can't take any time off because it'll fall apart. But it's really important to realize that you've got really good connections and really good colleagues and really good friends. You know, it's really important to build friends in this sort of movement as well. You know, don't always just see each other as sort of colleagues. It's, you know, have conversations outside of conservation with these people, so it becomes sort of not so much work, it becomes sort of a part of who you are. But also don't be afraid to take a step back, and you know, if you've got to focus on schoolwork or you've got to focus on family life, that's a really important thing to be able to do as well, and will probably be really important for the environmental movement and your contribution to it in the long term. You know, it's, you don't feel like you have to do everything and don't feel guilty for taking a break, but just don't be afraid to take a step back for a little bit if you need to. And then on the sort of question of the future, I think a friend of mine, Selena Chen, who is a wildlife photographer and is sort of an intersectional environmentalist, says that if you're ever in a room or at the table, hopefully one day it'll be an in-person table again, not just virtual forever, but make sure you take a look around and see, you know, who's not at the table, and is there a way that you can bring them into the table so that, you know, the conversation becomes a lot more, it becomes fuller and it becomes a better conversation when more people are at the table. So I just, yeah, that would be my leaving point, is make sure you always think about who's not there, and then how can you bring them in, and make sure that it's not tokenistic, it's nothing, you're actually getting people to feed in and actually have their voices listened to, especially those who, you know, haven't had their voices listened to for such a, well, forever really. And that's, you know, something that Reserva does, and that's why I'm really proud to be a part of this organization. And you know, the other three organizations represented here as well sound like they're all doing the same sort of and have similar values, which is really great and something that's really, really important to the future of environmentalism.
Okay, thank you everyone. That is time. That's a little bit over time. So thank you everyone who came. Thank you to our panelists. Definitely this was a very eye-opening conversation. I think even as a young person in conservation, it is always so good to connect with other people in the field and see, you know, their experiences, if it's a different organization or a different country or anything like that. I've put contact information for all of our panelists in the chat bar. So if anybody wants to connect with any of our speakers or their organizations, you know where to find them. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.